The way in which those boys were treated is dependent on the way in which they were seen. And the way in which they are seen is inextricable from the way in which people have been, or blackness has been produced through the camera. The way in which blackness is a wholesale fiction that has nonfiction consequences. And that sort of paradox and duality is, to me, in the image.
Okay, so I have to be honest. I went to a screening of Nickel Boys yesterday, and it was the first time that I met Brandon, I met RaMell, and in the 24 hours since I saw the film, a lot has changed. A lot has happened for this film, from the Gotham Awards to the New York Films Critics Circle Awards, which are being announced right now, where RaMell was also announced Best Director. So how does it feel? Yeah, give it up. What have the past 24 hours been like for all of you with this film?
I mean, I don't want to speak for everyone, but I will. I feel like we're all in a tornado.
Tornado.
No, pretty chaotic. I mean, not chaotic, but I think it's just surreal. The films take a long time. You know, this film idea, started small, grows into something large. So many people are involved. It just feels unprecedented, and the reception feels deeply appreciated.
Yeah. Wow. Anybody want to add how we're processing?
I've been hyped.
No, yeah, you've been hyped.
Jumping around being a hype man for all of this has been so much fun. Yesterday was so much fun. Yeah. They had great speeches at the Gotham Awards.
They did.
I think you can find a video of Aunjuanue announcing Brandon winning his award. It's the best.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love these people very much. So to celebrate not only what we were able to create together, but them and their accomplishments and what they were able to do in this film it's a joy. It's a very, very, very good time. Also, congratulations to Jemo Frey. He won Best
Cinematographer. Yes, Best Cinematographer. The New York Films Critics Circle. Yeah. So I guess that's the present. I want to take it all the way back to sort of the beginning of this process, just because I remember in the early pandemic reading the Nickel Boys. Colson Whitehead's Pulitzer Prize winning novel came out in 2019, and it was just so impactful, and it was just so visceral, it really packed an emotional punch. And I will say, thinking about what a film adaptation looked like, I never would have come up with your fantastic vision regarding the point of view and the perspective of placing the viewer, the audience, into the shoes of Elwood and also Turner. So can you talk to me about your conception, and how did you land on that as sort of our entryway point into this really impeccable novel?
Yeah, it's so interesting to talk about it, because it was the first idea that I had, and no one ever questioned it. My co-writer, Jocelyn Barnes, we just started a really initial conversations and never looked back. And then going through the filming process and then kind of being here, it's talked about as oh my God, the radical choice, it's so, how could you ever conceive it? And I'm just I couldn't have imagined it any other way. It didn't make sense to shoot it in the sort of third person omniscient camera language. I see the world. I don't know if y'all have seen this film I made, Hale County This Morning, this evening, but there's a first person aspect to it, and we're all first person, and that the camera has never approach that in a serious way, where it doesn't try to just be a formal conceit, where it's interested in the act of looking as opposed to the reproduction of the visual field, which is what most POVs do. It's just about wide angle and being perspectival, but that's not what human vision is. Human vision is attention to me. It's surprising. It's a no-brainer, and so luckily Plan B allowed the no-brainer to like grow into whatever this was.
Yeah, wow, that's so fantastic. I would love to know from an acting perspective. I know a little bit about film acting, and you're often not supposed to look directly at the camera, right, while you're performing and whatnot. So I would love to know, and I guess I'll start with Aunjuanue. You know, 'cause you have such a storied career. What was it like when you were approached with the script, and you were like, well, actually, sort of all the conventions that you might have about how to act on screen are sort of pushed to the side?
Yeah, I didn't know, so that helped. I really didn't know until I showed up to work, and you know, at that point I had the job already. So I couldn't question it, and I'm glad. You know what I mean? I didn't come in prepared for it in any sort of way. I just had to just sort of swim or drown. But I trusted him so much because of what I saw in Hale County, and I was ready for it. And I think with Hattie, particularly as we went on, it was very, very frustrating. But she was very frustrated. And I could not lean, you know, as an actor, I couldn't lean on or lean into any of the things that you know, the actors who I respect lean into, which is your scene partners. You know, there was an absence of that, but it helped me feel the loneliness of her.
Wow. Thinking about that and sort of the absence of a scene partner because you're acting opposite a camera, it's so incredible that the relationship between the two boys, Elwood and Turner, is so strong and visceral. How did you create that chemistry filming under sort of different circumstances than you normally would, I would imagine?
We just had a lot of opportunities to spend time together and get to know each other as people and build our friendship in the real world. And being able to do that made it so that when we got on set and were exploring these scenes and stepping into the shoes of these characters, there was no fear. There was an openness and an honesty that we had that came from our real friendship that was developing as we were spending time together. And so that helped. And we also had a different experience than Aunjuanue, in that we always kind of had each other, and that when it came to working with the scenes, we had moments before where we were able to go through lines together and inform each other of what the scene may look like if it were shot traditionally, and then it was just about getting in front of the camera. He would always be there. We were always physically present during the scenes, although we weren't on when we were off camera, saying the lines, being as present as we could possibly be for the other. And it was just about taking all of the work that we did beforehand and relying on it, trusting in it, and letting whatever happened happen.
Wow. Excuse me. Sorry, Brandon. What about you? How was it on your end?
Mine was just like the flipped end of Ethan's, so very similar experience. Yeah, we were kind of just thrust into it the first day. I mean, it's written in the script that it's going to be in POV, but I mean, we don't really consider what that's going to mean until we get there. Yeah. I mean, Ethan said most of it, and I agree with it all. Yeah, we had each other, and we had the space to explore with one another before going in and having to stare down the lens and still figure out how to imbue that lens with kind of the life of the other person. And yeah,
totally. No, that makes a ton of sense. Something else I loved about the film were sort of the artistic flourishes and sort of the found footage, and there's a lot of beyond just the scenes with you and at Nickel and at the Reformatory, RaMell, there's we see, there's an expanse to it as well. It's so grounded in reality, but then in moments we sort of we go to space. We see found real footage of these boys and what sort of they went through, and just depictions of life in Florida and for that black men went through at that time. Can you talk a little bit about how you went about finding this footage and sort of weaving it into the narrative, because it's such an integral part of the storytelling of the piece?
Yeah, I really love images, and I think I love that all images speak to all images in the same way that language philosophers talk about when you give someone a word or you say a word, it produces another word. It's just an ecosystem of language, like it's its own sort of ready-made construct, if that's the right way to say it. And so I believe that all images go beside all images. And in that, I think about when I'm watching films, the limited visual language. And it's kind of a little bit strange to me, the aesthetic choices that people make. Because to me, it's very interesting too. Yeah.
No, I was just agreeing that we don't typically, people stay in a box, or they don't really go beyond their this is what the movie looks like, and then pulling from different visual languages and different source materials and weaving that in is quite specific and sort of unique to this film, as well as the point of view perspective.
Yeah, well, it's like it seemed extremely I guess important for this narrative, because in reading Nickel Boys, you realize that the way in which the boys are treated, and it's based on the Dozier School for Boys, which is a real place that closed in 2011 in North Florida, and bodies started to be exhumed in 2013, that the way in which those boys were treated is dependent on the way in which they were seen. And the way in which they are seen is inextricable from the way in which people have been, or blackness has been produced through the camera. The way in which blackness is a wholesale fiction that has nonfiction consequences. And that sort of paradox and duality is, to me, in the image. And it goes into the archive. The archive, there's an imbalanced power dynamic between archival images of people, just in general. But for people of color, I like to say that 99% of every image by a person of color globally was made by a white person. And what's that mean? Like the best analogy I could come up with is like, what if every image of Americans were made by the British? They literally be caricatures. Yeah. But that's actually what the relationship between the camera, if you know photo history and Minstrel, Thomas Daddy Rice, the way that performance is embedded into the social document of the history of the South, you realize that the archival images that we see are a deep ideological fiction. And to me, that's a problem. And so how do you bring that into the conversation to not allow this narrative to, one, seem isolated to just the Dozier School boys, but also that it is a larger system that has a larger problem, and this is just one symptom of it,
Yeah, wow, that's a lot to hold, and I wonder for the actors, obviously, there's so much research. You have, the Colson Whitehead novel. You also have the script. You also have the Dozier School for Boys and actual, historical documents about this experience. How much research did you do, and how much did you sort of have to put all of that aside and just sort of live moment to moment? What's your sort of preparation like, and then when do you leave that aside and let it go and just be? Ethan?
Okay. For me, I think I during the audition process is when I learned about the Dozier School for Boys, which is a really big disappointment. To learn about it in the context of a self-tape request feels really odd. But I dove into that a bit. They offered some research materials for that. And then after reading the script that RaMell and Jocelyn wrote, I was already familiar with Coulson's work. I'd read The Underground Railroad, but I didn't know about the Nickel Boys. So I read the script, I thought it was beautiful, and then I just decided I wanted to read the book. just because, didn't know, if I'd be moving forward in the process or not. Thank goodness I did. But I picked up the book and started reading it, and it was really helpful into just diving into Elwood's world more, into diving in the overall world of Nickel Boys more. And but it was the preparation was mostly about connecting to Elwood and bringing life to him, and doing so authentically and honestly, so that the audience is also able to connect with him. And I mean, it's very difficult not to, given the way that this, at least in my eyes, it's difficult not to, given as an audience member, because you're kind of living and seeing through him. And so yeah, it was just that's what the focus was for me. Yeah. Once I was able to kind of feel like I was connected, once we were on set and going to work, that's when everything was kind of put aside, and it was just about being there, being present, being with Brandon or Aunjuanue. Despite them not being able to really physically interact with me, I was still able to offer my voice and still, be present in other ways, and hoping they felt that. So I did my best.
Yeah, no, we definitely felt it. Yeah, I wonder, just from a technical standpoint, what was perhaps the trickiest RaMell scene or moment to pull off? What you had the most anxiety going into? Just because we're experimenting with form and function here. Was there a specific scene that kept you up at night before you had to shoot it?
It's a good question. No, but I'll say the challenges that emerge on the day didn't produce that anxiety. For example, the scene in which Aunjuanue comes to visit Elwood and can't visit him, and then, of course, gives the hug to Brandon, to Turner. We were just so short on time, and this, we realized we couldn't shoot in this direction because there was this thing that we couldn't VFX out later, so we had to keep it to this angle. And, we needed this lawnmower to work because the lawnmower was going to be part, while Aunjuanue and Turner were having a conversation, it was written in the script that, and this is all super inside stuff. If this makes it on Twitter, I will come for you.
Phone stamp.
I'm just gonna memorize everyone's face really quick. All right. There's a lawnmower that was there, supposed to be, we wanted, the film is about, and not a literal human experience, but human consciousness, what it's like for the camera to be an organ. You're inside the brain of a person. You're, viewing the reality of the character simultaneously. And so in trying to be as authentic, as conceptually possible as a human as looking in the world, we wanted, Jocelyn Barnes and I wanted the audience to miss things. We wanted things to be out of reach of hearing, so you have to sort of fill in that gap as you do as a human and make that narrative happen, because that's what we do. And so we had a lawnmower that was supposed to be pulling its chain as Aunjuanue and Brandon were talking, so that you couldn't hear they're talking, you couldn't hear what they're saying sometimes. And it was gonna be a white kid that was trolling Turner, then the lawnmower wasn't working. And this would happen across scenes, things just come up, and then you have to, we don't have that vital element of the scene. How do we not dwell on that and then have the scene have some element of that? And so it's just a filmmaking process. You realize, keep the spirit of the scene, the spirit of the film, and it can work out.
Wow, God, that makes so much sense in terms of missing it, because that's how we move through life. Missing bits and pieces and having to fill in and fill in the gaps and fill in the holes.
It's sorry, just to give you one example of why that. I think the best version of that is which is like a difficult scene for the people who give notes to let happen, which is like, you remember when you're with, Blakely comes and gives you the note, and he like says the Martin Luther King speech to you, you go sit on the bed, and Turner's behind you. But we don't see any of Ethan's face while he's reading the note to Hattie. It's just, he's just like this. And Turner's just like staring at his back, like, how's grandma? You know? Yeah. But like, as a viewer, you want to be able to see his face while he reads it to read all those things. But me as a filmmaker and as a human, that the world doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
You know, like,
it doesn't. Yeah.
Films are built to like hand the audience all of the information, which to me, it does something to psychology and the human process that I'm uncomfortable with. And so you're behind Ethan, who is Elwood, and you miss it all. You have to make it up. He's anxious, you're annoyed. Like, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's visceral. You feel it.
Yeah.
You feel it in a way that you don't necessarily, if it was just like, oh, we're sitting and it's in proscenium and it's, you know, we would not have that same reaction. It's really incredible. I was also struck just in terms of the storytelling too, and just the placement and the time and history, like the connection to history, as you just said, Martin Luther King Jr. It's like, this is happening like years after the March on Washington. Like, and obviously we know, we get this incredibly moving monologue about Nana and her, you know, what happened to her father, and sort of, you know, and him, you know, his lynching, and we see how this reformatory school is just, you know, another bastion of slavery, which is going to then lead to the prison industrial complex. It's all connected in such a long and terrible and sad history that is, again, via like both the groundedness of the first person perspective approach, and then also the expanse of the archival footage, really grounds us in like a specific historical moment that I was gobsmacked. I was like, I can't believe this is happening right now. I thought, and starting with him in school and seeing that difference was so powerful. So I guess how did you let history sort of influence your work and your sort of artistic and directorial eye? And then for the actors, how often were you thinking about the actual history and your own personal history, you know, as Black people, you know, in this country?
I like that question for Aunjuanue first, maybe.
I know
you knew.
You go last, but I would, yeah.
I was just looking at Aunjuanue, but she wouldn't look over, and so she knew. Only because of the way that you talk about the way in which your grandparents and your mother and your elders resisted burdening you with the trauma that they've experienced, and then you having to kind of infer that for the Hattie character, I think is really fascinating as like a process, historical sort of like almost oral storytelling or lack of oral storytelling, psychic transference, you know?
Yeah, my grandmother. I'm from Pike County, Mississippi, and my grandfather was a pastor of 4 different churches in Pike County, and in 1964. My town, Macomb, Mississippi, was called the bombing capital of the world because there were so many bombings and shootings and fires. So his church was bombed, and he was arrested for bombing his own church.
Whoa.
Yeah, and so he, I know, it is funny.
That's ridiculous.
So he was arrested and taken to jail in the middle of the night. And his family, which is my, family, my grandmother, they didn't know whether he was going to be returned. He might have been lynched and, met the fate of so many other people during that time. But he did come back home. Now, that's an incredible story, but I never heard that story from my grandmother.
Really?
My grandmother never told me that. Never. Now, I heard about it because it's family lore, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's stuff we talk about, during this time of year, during the holidays. And so that's why I knew that it happened. The people who were actually involved in the bombing, for certain, they were, probably police officers and AKA Klansmen, AKA police officers, AKA Klansmen, who actually did that, and none of them have been arrested for it. Now, my grandmother went through that, and she never told me that. So, playing Hattie, we were gonna do a scene where Hattie goes to visit Elwood. And RaMell and I talked about how would she be affected by the pain and of losing Elwood and his still being alive. What would that do to her? So we thought about, she loses it, and we would see that. We would see the physical manifestation of her losing it. So we did a take of the scene, and my clothes were disheveled. I was, I did my wig askew and that kind of thing. We did one take of that. And both of us agreed that doesn't work, right? Yeah. And RaMell said to me, that's not what she does. She holds it together. She holds it together. I'm paraphrasing. That's not what he said. He was far more eloquent. But anyway, now in these discussions that I'm having, I'm able to make that connection to my grandmother.
Wow.
Because my grandmother never said a thing to me. Never said a thing to me. And she went through that kind of suffering. She went through that kind of pain. And yet she was always looking cute.
Yeah.
Always had her hat. Always had her stockings. Always had her slip never hanging.
Yeah.
She always was the wife of Reverend Ned Taylor and was no less than that. She never wanted me... RaMell used the word burden me with that story, but I don't think it ever occurred to her to tell me that.
Wow.
I don't think they made those choices consciously, because they just they just had to keep moving through the world. I realize now, I feel like that's what Hattie was doing. She had to be Elwood's horizon. She had to be his promise. She had to be his tomorrow, and she couldn't fall apart if she collapsed into that.
Yeah. Wow. That is really powerful. Thank you for sharing that with us too. That's really powerful. I have a million questions. I could sit here all day, but I know we have to go soon. But I do want to, before we leave, I would love to know what each of you hope, the audiences take away from this story and the way that it's told. Just because it's in many ways it's not a new story, right? This is sort of a tales of this time for Black people in Black America. It's a fresh perspective on this system, on a new system that has existed, that continues to exist and persist. And I would love to know what you hope people take away.
I do want to say this real quick. It's important, though, Chris, for us to realize, though, it wasn't just Black children who were at the Dozier School.
That's true.
It was white kids at that school as well. Yeah. So
that is very important, and we see that the they're living a little bit different life. Same. At least in the film, awful, but definitely different. But yes.
I'll jump in and won't answer that question, but I'll answer your other question, and then maybe everyone else can talk about kind of what they want the takeaways to be. But you mentioned history, and that's kind of how we jumped into Aunjuanue talking. And I think one thing that was interesting about the process is that we weren't interested in history, because we're interested in the now, which is history. Yeah. We wanted these two to feel like young men that exist now, that exist then, that exist now, in the same sort of back and forth that Aunjuanue was talking about. Like, obviously things have changed, but have times changed? I don't know. Times is not necessarily something people really agree on these days. Yeah. And so one of the strengths of these two is that they are kind of timeless, and they did not put their casting tapes in trying to play historical boys from the 60s. They were each other as each of the characters, and in that sense they could span, they could hold they could express what it feels like to be a boy now, which is the same feelings that those boys had then. So that's how we deal with history, by not really thinking about it in that sense.
Yeah, that's It's ever present, and what's now is past. But I would love, just.
Ethan, what would you take away from that?
What did you take away? What do you hope that the audiences take away from your performance?
It's funny. You guys have probably heard me say this a million times, and my feelings remain the same. I don't want to tell you guys how to feel about what you just experienced. I think the movie really speaks for itself, and I feel like with all the conversations we've had, with all the different kinds of people that we've met, it's affected them very differently. What I will say is that you guys just went through a very unique experience of being brought into this world in a way that you've likely never seen before. You lived through it through the eyes of these two boys, and that is going to bring about so many different emotions, and I encourage you guys to sit with them, to not leave this theater and let those feelings go away. I'd like you to, if you're able to, go home, take a moment, take a bath, whatever you need, just sit with those feelings, sit with the idea of what it is like to really live in someone else's shoes and to view the world from someone else's perspective. And then also consider how that makes you feel. And then also think about the fact that you shared that experience with everyone else in this theater. You didn't do it by yourself. You're sitting with other people that also had this experience. Talk to them. Talk to other people. Encourage people to go through this experience, because I think that now more than ever, it's important to be able to view the world through other people's eyes and consider their experiences a little deeper. I think that it just opens the door to a compassion and kindness that is really important for us to be giving to each other in the same way that you were able to see Turner and Elwood and Hattie all give to each other during the film. So that is what I encourage you guys to do.
And as you see, that's why he is Elwood.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, well, I think that really sums it up, and I can't thank you all enough for sitting with me and conversing with me about your really beautiful work and a really beautiful and just absolutely inspiring and unique film for our times and also timeless. So I really thank you. And thank you all for sitting here. So give it up for RaMell, Brandon, Ethan, and Aunjuanue Ellis-Taylor. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Chris.
Appreciate it.